Motion carries. First, we have an introduction of an ordinance authorizing the sale of property located at 11850 Indian Lane.
Madam Mayor, move to introduce an ordinance authorizing the sale of property located at 11850 Indian Lane, Hagerstown, Maryland, to 17 Mile Real Estate LLC for a purchase price of $575,000. The sale will provide the opportunity for new investment at 11850 Indian Lane. The sale will be in accordance with all the terms and conditions outlined in the attached contract of sale.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Approval of funding to accommodate change order number 9 for 261-263 South Prospect Street renovation.
Madam Mayor, hereby move for the mayor and city council to approve funding of $36,944.67 to accommodate the added expense of the attached change order number 9 for the 261 to 263 South Prospect Street renovation contract with Colossal Contractors, Inc.
Second.
Any discussion?
Hopefully there will not be a 10th.
Phew, right?
Okay, what?
Hopefully there's an attention for it.
Oh.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Moving into our work session. Up first today, we have the Clara Barton Committee.
Thank you, Mayor and Council members. I'm Al Martin, the Chair of the Clara Barton Memorial Committee, and with me today are several committee members, in addition to our artist, Toby Mendez, who will in a moment be unveiling the statue, but I wanted to take a moment and introduce our other committee members. I think everyone knows Tom Reifert, the Undersecretary of Commerce for Arts, Culture, and Tourism, Rachel Kennedy Nichols, and Steve Hummel. And very excited to have this group working with us. They're the same folks that were largely responsible for the Thomas Kennedy Memorial that was so successful on East Baltimore Street, and made me feel very confident in accepting chairmanship of this group. And pleased to report our progress as well as unveiling the statue. And it's hard to believe we were here talking with you just about a year ago about getting this project started, and we thank you for your cooperation and collaboration with us. The agreements really enabled us to be very successful in getting us where we are, and I'm pleased to report before Toby unveils that we have reached over 90% fundraising. We have raised $589,000 so far. State bond bills, heritage area grants, and then cash in the bank from various foundations. And we're excited. We still have other foundation asks out there, so we're very confident we're going to hit 100% of our fundraising goals. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Toby for the part you're all interested in.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I thought I'd bring the mayor and council up to date on where we are with the sculpture development. This is where we left you with the concept rendering showing kind of the plaza design. We're working with the city on the site design, and that's our next steps. But one of the wonderful things we were able to do in the process, let me back up. Well, it all starts with research. So from the concept, I had to go to the design phase, and so I brought in a model to pose as the soldier. Park Ranger Matt Borders posed as the Union soldier, and then I had a model come in the pose for Clara. But the whole way I look at this is that when you're designing something like this, it's kind of a house of cards where every card has to be built on facts and history and so forth, so that it stands on its own. So I did a great deal of research in wardrobe, the history of Antietam, etc., involving historian Dennis Fry, Tom Clemens, and also Matt Borders. It's just all images that inspired, as well as Clara Barton. And then this is the clay maquette. Once that was approved by committee, this went to enlargement, and it was enlarged full scale in foam by Digital Atelier up in New Jersey. And one of the wonderful things that we were able to do is to involve the students of Barbara Ingram School for the Arts, and about 100 students and faculty from Barbara Ingram went up to New Jersey and to Philadelphia to see where this is going to be cast in bronze. And the following week, the digital atelier sent the foam to my studio. You can get a sense of the scale of the monument. Dee Dee, who's standing to the left of it, is about 5'4", 5'5". So you can see how large it is. And then on Monday, for that week, I had the students from Barbara Ingram come in, 15 of them. This is, again, the enlargement,
From Trenton.
and gives you an idea of scale. But this is what I had in my studio, 15 kids working, putting that first coat of clay on the foam. And it was a great experience for all of us. It gave them a real-world experience of being in a sculptor studio, professional environment, and kind of see, you know, what my day in the life is like. You could see hanging on the rack to the left, Clara Barton's head upside down and an arm of Clara Barton. And these students are putting clay on those foam pieces.
And then you'll do the final fine sculpting on that, correct?
That's right. So that was them. Within a week, they put that first coat of clay on. And that's all of them. And I saved, you know, the faces for me. And what I do is I come in and refine the clay. And that's what I'm doing now. This is the current version of Clara Barton in my studio. And this is the design that we're going to see unveiled today. So I'm going to go ahead and unveil that. And Alice.
Assist you.
Do you have any questions?
It's tremendous.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's tremendous.
Yeah, so the hope is that here in the next month, it'll go to the foundry in Philadelphia, and they'll start the bronze casting. And this winter, we'll order the stone. And
For the base.
for the base. And we'll work through the winter with Rodney Tissue and his office designing the site. And then the hope is that the first week of May, Nurses Week, we will do a groundbreaking for the project.
If that coordinates with the city schedule.
Exactly. And then we'll work with the city on a dedication date. It could be early summer, or it could be the anniversary of Antietam, which is September 17th. Go ahead, Alan. Do you have anything else?
Yeah, and we're looking at, you know, the unveiling or the groundbreaking being an opportunity to publicize the actual, you know, work there at the site. We're so excited that have raised already 90% of the funds. But again, the final 10% is always a challenge. One of the things that's been very helpful is we're keeping a scorecard of what's been raised. To date, we actually have collected $250,000 roughly that's been deposited with the Community Foundation of Washington County. They're doing a super job of accounting for everything for us and helping with donor acknowledgement and then keeping track of everything. We have, again, I said the commitments that aren't in there yet as part of that 250 is the 250 in state bond bill money, the 65,000 from the Maryland Heritage Area grant, and then we have one other larger grant from a health system that we've gotten a commitment on, and we're expecting that to be received shortly in the near future to the foundation. And we then will be raising the final amount of money. We have open ask with several foundations still outstanding. And of course, the public still has an opportunity to assist in smaller gifts for pavers and things like that. So we'll try to get some information on the city site, if you don't mind, about how the general public might be able to support with the memorial paver at different levels, a brick or a paver to acknowledge a loved one or something in honor of someone to be part of the project in perpetuity. We are a little concerned about inflation, so our goal is to try to over-raise just so that we make sure we have enough to cover inflationary costs at the foundry. We are, as Toby said, through the initial sculpting phase, the enlargement. The next step will be to actually, after Toby finishes his fine tuning of the enlarged sculpture, the fine sculpting, it will then have a mold made. I don't know what that's made out of, latex or something else, but then that then creates the piece that then will go to the foundry. that it's an interesting process, and it's been around for hundreds of years. It's called a lost wax casting. So literally, they use that latex or rubber mold or something to then put wax around that. Then they coat the wax in ceramic, heat-resistant ceramic, that then they'll heat the thing up, melt the wax out, and then that leaves a void in the ceramic that then is what the bronze, the metal, is poured into to create the actual final sculpture. So there's still quite a few steps to go with the foundry, which will be the next big step after we complete this enlargement or the fine sculpting and molding process. And then while that's going on, hopefully we can be moving forward with some of the site work and also ordering the stone and the plaques that will be the interpretive plaques and the donor recognition plaques for the memorial. I'm excited to be working with this group. They had such success with Thomas Kennedy. He's an expert, a world-renowned expert that knows what he's doing, and gives me great confidence as a citizen of being able to sell this as something important for our community and that will be a successful project. So I'm very confident in our team and what we'll be able to deliver for the community.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You want to
Thank you
get
guys very
pictures next to it, or
I'm sorry?
Yeah.
you want
I think
photos
it'd be
next
great
to
to
it?
get your,
Yeah.
We could turn it if we need.
yeah.
Well, you guys gotta get in the picture.
We are. We're all getting in the picture. We're all getting in the picture, Chris. We're getting in the picture.
I thought they were doing
No.
I
We're
can
getting
turn
in
it or
it.
whatever.
We can go this.
We could actually move the pedestal.
Which way do you want to go? Which way do you want to?
Or if you want to do a group photo someplace else.
We can move the pedestal.
It might be a better group photo if we can get everybody around it. I think that's
No.
yeah.
That's and everything. That's all.
Yeah, that
That's a real thing. They got it here. Yes.
Give me a minute.
But we certainly thank you and the city staff for all the support. This wouldn't be possible without everyone's collaboration. So thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna do one from my camera. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Rodney. Okay. Thanks, sir.
You see anything about the rest?
Thank all of you.
Would you want to say anything about the rest of the traffic?
I haven't paid less than a minute.
And we had a community meeting on the rest of the triangle design, and we'll be bringing that back in October as to the results of that.
Word.
They were. For the record. Word.
We'll put that back in Tom Ryford's office in Baltimore.
Thank you very much, Nat.
Have a good day.
Lost the mayor.
I'm okay with this.
Here she comes.
Get her what?
Back to our scheduled program. All right, up next, we have the after-school program, Parkside Community Center. Chief Kiefer and Deanna Rodesil. Oh, yeah, Frostburg is being postponed.
Word.
Good evening. I'm going to let Deanna talk about the proposal here.
Hello. Ever since the hotspot days, if some of you remember, we have operated a homework program and after-school program on Suman Avenue, along with a dance program. This was initially a governor's initiative, and it was eventually switched over to the city's budget. And the city has been supporting that, and the Housing Authority has been overseeing that program for a number of years now. This year, we've had a change with the program, with one of the programs, in that the dance program will not be returning this year, which is unfortunate, but we will continue the after-school program, which serves the youth in the community in grades K through 3. So we currently have two, well, actually 3 tutors. We have a lead person and 2 tutors that provide services to the kids after school. So what we would like to propose is that the funding, which was $3,500 that the dance program received annually, we are requesting that be transferred over to the homework program to help further support that. Since we have actually not gotten a raise in that program or asked for any increases for 20 couple years. So we've been running on, a shoestring budget with that. And of course, with the increases, we're just asking to assist a little bit with that.
I'm okay with it. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, up next, licensing of transient housing. Puff and Kathy.
Is this the?
So, I work with technology here. I'm not seeing anything on the TV screens. Eric, we may need your assistance. Oh, there we go. It's technology and how it works. So tonight, not only do we have Kathy and myself from PCAB, but we also have representatives from the police department, fire department, and I don't know if I saw Buck here or not from TRS, but that we do have other representatives from the city here for where transient housing or hotels is draw on all of our services. It's not just from the PCAT department, it's just that our office has organized this presentation here. So like we discussed back in July, why are we looking at licensing any hotels, motels, or short-term rentals? Basically, the maintenance of the hotels have fallen behind codified standards for fire safety and also property maintenance. There's a lack of training to staff for fire protection, emergency incidences, and evacuation standards. Also, the hotel units are for extended stay are not designed for that type of occupancy, leading to unsafe living conditions. Also, the hotels that are being used as dwelling units, they're not zoned for those types of uses in those areas. The hotels are also not in good standing with the state or county and city for different taxes or also utility payments. And then also, there's an increased demand for the police, fire, code departments, and also our CRS divisions. So what are the ordinance requirements? So as we discussed back in July, we're looking at different standards here because we are not only having a stadium, but we're having our sports complex, we have our A&E districts, we have a lot of people coming to Hagerstown, and we have people that are looking to come into this area as well to support all of these different things that are being done. So how can we make sure that our hotel staff are being able to have some sort of level of standard, and our hotels have standards as well, so that people that come to Hagerstown are going to want to come back to Hagerstown again? So one of the things that we looked at by looking at other ordinances that exist in not only Maryland but across the country is a human trafficking training. Now this is something that, although we're mentioning this, but it was actually passed by the state of Maryland. This is now in Comar, becomes effective October 1, that all hotel staff are to have this type of training for human trafficking. So it's coming no matter what. No matter if we create this ordinance or not, hotels are required to have this type of training. Also, establishing an overdose response program training so that the Washington County Health Department would be able to provide this type of training to everyone. And as far as the human trafficking training, one thing I forgot to mention is that the hotel chains or their corporate offices can provide that type of training. COMAR is allowing that, or also DSS actually offers training as well, so a government entity could also provide that type of training. One of the things that we also looked into as far as guest registry, this is a way to make sure that the guests that are staying in our community are being well known that they're in a building. Because if we have some sort of emergency situation or an evacuation that needs to happen at a hotel, this is required by the fire department. You need to know who's in the hotel to make sure everyone's out. So this is having it where it includes some photo ID, the name of the visitor, the date and time that they've showed up, the license plates of any motor vehicles, also the method of payment, including any credit card information. So this is something just for a guest registry. Guest registry is very common. All of us do it out of habit when we go to a hotel right now, but it's not a common practice in all hotels. So it's requiring a guest registry for all hotels. And then also prohibitions on hourly rates for hotels and motels. So these are just requirements for all hotels that would be in Hagerstown. One of the other things is also looking at making sure that all the payments that are due to any government entity are up to date at the time of application. Now, I'll say at the time of application, when you kind of look at this slide or the information that's been provided to you, that there's a whole bunch of different due dates in here. We talk about taxes. Taxes are due in July, but then they could do installment payments that have different payment dates. Also, personal property taxes that they can do on a rolling basis that come 2 times a month. That they have 30 days to pay. Now, a state can suspend a license, a business license, if they don't have them paid on time. The city-controlled utilities, bills are done 30 days for water and 21 for electric. So how in the world could we ever keep track of that? I know I can't. So support services would actually be our help for this, where they would be able to review the applications to make sure that everyone was current at the time of application. Time of application, we're saying, would be December 1, so then they would make sure that everyone was current at that time. If they weren't, then that would look into not licensing an entity for not having current payments to the city. Now, one of the things that we talked about back in July was the tiered approach for hotels, because we wanted to make sure that we were not penalizing hotels that were basically doing the things that I've already mentioned, but also holding those accountable for the ones that are not keeping to the standards. So as a governing body, we can't just target specific hotels. We have to license all hotels. It's either all or none. So we have to choose where we're going to do. We have to be fair and consistent when we're applying these standards. So we're looking at a 2-tier approach where tier 1 would be no license fee. There would be no fee for a tier 1 hotel, and they would have the fire department inspection that would be conducted annually on the property there. That they have no current life safety violations at the time of application, and the property is fully sprinklered. Now, one of the things that we talked about was these calls for service, and I'll get into that in a little bit, but there is the less than 1 calls for service per room per year. This will be evaluated annually. Next, for a tier 2 hotel, we're talking about that it'd be a $500 licensing fee, that the fire department had their inspection within the last year, or it's been greater if they were being denied some sort of access, that they do have current life safety violations at the property, or the hotel is not fully sprinklered. So it's not an and there, it's an or. So either they have life safety violations or they're not sprinklered. And then with the calls for service, that it would be greater than 1 per room per year. Again, that'd be evaluated annually. Now, once a tier was determined and a hotel wanted to challenge that, they could appeal to the Board of Code Appeals within 20 days once the tier determination was made to challenge that tier if they felt that it was inaccurately determined for that tier. So now, back in July, when we first talked about this, we were talking about different places that has some sort of hotel licensing. In Maryland, we have to remember that Annapolis, Anne Arundel County, Baltimore County, College Park, Gaithersburg, Howard County, Laurel, Montgomery County, Ocean City, Rockville, and Salisbury all have hotel licensing. So this is not something new. These hotels that exist in Hagerstown that are chain brand exist in these other communities as well and are licensed. So this is not something that is just specific to Hagerstown. And Frederick does not have a licensing program for hotels, but they do require the human trafficking training. That was something they just recently passed within the last year. We looked into the tier approach because if that's what was the feedback we had received from the mayor and council back in July. In Maryland, there is no tiered program. College Park offers a program where they do it like a biennial type inspection and license program that you could qualify for, but they don't offer a tiered approach. The only one that we could find that existed was Benbrook, Texas, that they did a calls for service approach that would determine your tier. So we defined a calls for service as that it includes but is not limited to any and all calls to public safety services, which would be police, fire, medical, and code enforcement, that result in a public safety employee being dispatched or directed to a hotel. This shall include any calls this shall include any calls for service within the surrounding neighborhood that through an information or investigation can be attributed or traced to a hotel premise. Calls for service include any self-initiated activity or investigation based on observations from any public safety employee. Multiple calls regarding the same event shall be treated as a single call for service for a proposed calculating that CPS room ratio. So if you had a lot of calls that some event was going on in the same night and people kept on calling police or fire, it would all be grouped together for that same event. It wouldn't be multiple calls going against someone. I know one of the concerns that was brought up is that, would this reduce the number of calls for service for these places? Would people just not call? So I reached out to Benbrook, Texas, and talked to them about their ordinance that they have and talked to their police department. They said the calls keep coming in. People are still calling. No matter they have the calls for service program that you think it would reduce them, it's not. They're still coming in. They actually feel that they get more calls now at hotels than probably they did before. So the calls do keep on coming in. One of the things that Benbrook, Texas had in their ordinance as well was the drug-related definition. And drug-related, they say that it includes but not limited to the manufacturing, cultivation, importation into the state, transportation, possession for sale, furnishing, administering, giving away, providing a place to use, or fortification of a place involving any illegal or controlled drug, narcotic, or drug paraphernalia. So they define drug-related in this ordinance, but that does not go back to specifically a person at the hotel. It goes back to the hotel owner. That the hotel owner has a drug-related charge. They can do a background investigation on the owner, and if they're violating anything related to the drug-related, can be something that can hold them accountable for providing either places to use or allowing drug sales to occur at their property. So it's going back to the owner, not to the specific person. So one of the things comes down is the inspections for these hotels. Like we mentioned, that in the tier 1, it would be an annual inspection by the fire department, fire marshal office, and that's the way it is currently now. There's nothing different in the tier 1. The fire marshal's office goes out for an annual inspection at a place. They can call code at that time if they identify something that is outside the realm of their fire code. They would give us a call, and we would come out and assist at that time if there was something that was outside their ability through their code. A tier 2 hotel would have the annual fire marshal's inspection, but also would have an annual inspection by the code department. And this inspection can be established standards by the mayor and council. So it's no different than we talked about previously with the rental ordinance, that we have safety inspection standards that the mayor and council adopted a policy to establish those standards that we would inspect to. We can do the same thing. So it's not saying it's the whole entire code book. It's not saying that you're taking a hotel that's built from the 1970s and saying that it's got to meet current code standards. No, we're saying we could establish those standards to what we would inspect to. It's making it consistent across the board for all hotels. The one item that we are proposing in this ordinance as well is that it includes a right of entry in the ordinance if we are denied access to any area of a hotel or to the hotel in general, so that we can make sure that we're inspecting all areas of the hotel and nothing is not going without the site of the fire marshal's office or the code office as needed.
That would include the administrative warrant if necessary.
Correct. That would be an administrative warrant if needed. So one of the things that always gets brought up with the hotel inspections is that our chain hotels have certain standards that they go by. That the hotels will have ones that are established within their chains, and that they shouldn't have inspections by the city. But when I was doing research with this, is that there are no set standards in the hotel industry for inspections. That the hotels can conduct what they call quality insurance inspections or QA inspections, and these are that independent or franchise-owned chains can establish the standards for these inspections. So the hotel chain can create their own standards, or they hire some third party that will create these inspection standards for the hotel, and then people go out and inspect them to that level. The hotel, when they establish these QA inspection standards, they're more or less so that if you go to a certain brand hotel, when you walk in that door, you feel comfortable that you go, no matter if you're in Hagerstown or if you're in the middle of the country, you're on the West Coast or down south, that if you go into that brand hotel, you're going to experience the same each time you go into that hotel. So that's the standards that they establish. And just an example that I was able to find, Marriott has 12 different QA inspection standards for each of their brands. So each brand has their own QA standard. And sometimes it gets down to the collar of the chairs, where the vase needs to be, what flowers need to be in a vase. It gets way down into the details with it, but they're not generally building or fire code standards. So when we establish standards for the city for hotel inspections, the fire marshal's office would inspect to the same standard for every hotel. There wouldn't be any difference between any hotel in Hagerstown. And then the code department would also be able to inspect to the same standards for every hotel, whatever's established by the mayor and council. Now, of course, we wouldn't inspect every hotel because in the code side, it would only be for a tier 2 hotel, not any tier 1 hotels. Now, one of the things with any ordinance that you create, we have to be able to hold people accountable for not meeting standards that's established. So we're proposing the suspension and revocation clauses within the ordinance so that we can suspend a license or revoke it. A suspended license, the hotel will remain open. We're not saying that it would be closed, but there would be no new guests until compliance with the inspection standards or some other city standard that might be not being met. Unoccupied rooms, we would placard, not with a condemned placard, but something identifying that room could not be rented out again. A revoked license would mean the hotel would close until they have compliance with the inspection standards. Any life safety hazards, it would be immediately vacated. We couldn't let that stay there. If they don't have any fire protection in the building, for example, that the fire suppression system has gone down, no one can stay in that hotel. And then non-life safety standards, we would give them 24 hours. Now, again, at that point, when we're saying this, that it's something that's probably been going on for quite some time. This isn't something that just immediately happened. It's been going on for some time. With each of those, there would be some sort of reinstatement fee. We're proposing $500 reinstatement fee for a suspended license and a $1,000 reinstatement fee for a revoked license. So now, when we take all these things into consideration, where do each of our hotels fall? So if we're looking at the hotel classifications based on last year, calendar year, we would be looking at 8 hotels that fell into a tier 1 category, and we would have 4 hotels that would fall into a tier 2 category. Again, the tier 1, they would pay no licensing fee. They would have the annual fire marshal inspection. A tier 2 hotel would have a $500 annual licensing fee, a fire marshal inspection, and an inspection from code. So these are where they fall. Now, just as a reminder, tier 1 hotels, they wouldn't experience any changes other than completing an application with us to just give us contact information. They would also have to do the human trafficking training, which is required by state law now, so nothing different there other than it's required by state law in addition to the city. They would have the Overdose response program training, and then the guest registry, which a lot of hotels already do the guest registry part that are in that tier 1 category. So what does some of the impact have on that? So there's over 1,200 hotel rooms in Hagerstown in our corporate limits. Approximately a third of them would fall into the tier 2 category with these hotels that are here. And the one thing that we have to remember is that as we're trying to establish a standard that we want people to come back to stay in Hagerstown, how many stays does that generally mean? So that could be 20 to 75,000 people annually that could potentially stay in a tier 2 hotel. And is that the impression that as a city, do we want to leave on our guests? So we're trying to come up with some sort of standard to this. Like we always say, bad news travels real well, doesn't it? But good news doesn't travel. So we want to make sure that we figure out a way to address those. So that's going, we focus a lot on hotels, but it's transient stay. So transient stays also includes some of our other stays in Hagerstown. So we have our bed and breakfasts and our short-term rentals. bed and breakfast, it would be great if we have them in Hagerstown, but we don't have any bed and breakfasts right now. But it's like the same thing when we had the rental ordinance. We didn't do dormitories, and then the city got dormitories, and then we had to put them back into the rental program so we could actually license them. So it's already established in the bed and breakfast standards, so if we do get any in Hagerstown, we have something in place already for them. They would have a fee structure and then annual inspection for the exterior, and then we would go inside once every 3 years. Short-term rentals be the same thing. We have approximately 200 short-term rentals in our community right now is what an agency that reached out to me saying, do you want to know where all your short-term rentals are? So they said approximately 200. I don't know. I didn't reach back out to them, but that's what they estimate.
That could be our zip code. It
Correct.
may not be just the city.
Right. It just would be the zip code saying Hagerstown, so we
get a
don't know
lot
for
of
sure.
cold calls for
Yeah.
software.
But again, same standard as a bed and breakfast, that inspected annually on the outside and then once every 3 years on the inside, just making sure that it's safe for any transient guests to go there, because Airbnb, VRBO, all those are getting more popular for people to stay at. One of the other things for further consideration is also, amending Chapter 95 for the excessive use of city services. This is something that we're already shown that our police, fire, and CRS is going to these properties frequently. That was included in your packet on the table. You can see they're always going out there to specific hotels. So we're looking at, when you have 60 calls for service in a 12-month time period, you'd be considered a chronic nuisance property. And then if you're a short-term rental or bed and breakfast, that if you had 10 calls for service in a 12-month time period, you would be considered a chronic nuisance property. So what does it mean to be a chronic nuisance property? So on the 61st call, the city could fee you $100 for that calls for service that an agency would have to respond to. The 62nd call would be $250, and the 63rd or more would be $500 for each call that we would go out to. So it's penalizing them for not maintaining a property to reduce calls for service to our agencies. And then also looking at amending Chapter 65 for habitual offender, including the transient licensing program in that ordinance. The habitual offender ordinance is a misdemeanor or criminal charge against the property owner for not meeting certain standards. So that would be where they would have to have 3 convictions. That would be through the court, or paying 3 citations for being convicted. So that would be where they would have a misdemeanor charge. So these are the ones that we put together, not only just through PCAD, but also through our fire, police, and CRS agencies here. So the next steps for this is basically we can draft an ordinance, if you're good with these that we propose to you, but working with legal, and present something back in October.
I would like to change the 1 room per call to 0.95 rooms per call. That rounds up to 1. There's no reason. If you look at the list.
The lights on stuff.
Also, I'm gonna ask the question we're all probably wondering, what do we do about the Dagmar?
All right, so the Dagmar in itself, what is the Dagmar classified? So the Dagmar is actually classified as a rooming house with the city. It is underneath the rental licensing ordinance. It is not considered a hotel with the city. We licensed the property since 2003 as a rooming house. It was first listed in 2003 as a 12-room rooming house with the city. And that was up until 2008. And then we were like, we need to get inside this property to see what is going on at that property. So at that time, we determined that it was an 82 rooming house because it was being operated that way as a rooming house. When we did the research on the property through zoning, that we found that Dagmar had been existing as a rooming house prior to 1977, which is when the zoning ordinance was adopted. So therefore, it's a legal use to have at that property. So the Dagmar operates as a rooming house.
But it's not a rooming house.
I understand. So one of the things that's further consideration on that one is that I did more research on the property, also with College Hall, which is attached to it, as a 49-room rooming house. In 2007, we determined that it could not operate as a rooming house anymore at that location, but it continued to operate that way, and we have no ability at that time to shut it down. It was reaffirmed in 2014 that it still is operating as a rooming house, not in compliance with the ordinances. And one of the things too is, while we went back further through researching all of this, is that the Dagmar was renovated in the 1980s. and the architect determined it to be an R1 hotel at that time. The city did issue a temporary occupancy in 1987 as a hotel. So one of the things that we have to figure out as a staff has to work on is what is the classification of the Dagmar? Do we want to call it a hotel, or are we calling it a rooming house? And some of that also goes down into the eviction proceedings that the Dagmar would have to go through. Evictions are different for hotels versus rooming houses, and I think that they go back and forth between the classifications of what the Dagmar will fall under. But I can tell you that we do inspections out at the Dagmar once every 4 years right now for the property, but I think the police and fire can tell you that they respond very frequently to the Dagmar for calls for service.
And it wouldn't be considered a short-term rental location? I mean, they don't stay very long, some, right?
Well, that's kind of like how a rooming house kind of is, that sometimes there's
Right.
short stays
So what's
at
the
a
difference
property.
between a rooming house and a short-term rental?
I do not know.
Do they pay county
Okay.
hotel motel tax?
They do pay it, but it's not as much as what we see for some of our other hotels.
If a property's paying hotel motel tax,
It is a hotel or a motel.
right, I mean,
The Dagmar.
otherwise they just wouldn't.
The Dagmar has a permit, they're going through renovations for the 6th and 7th floor to be a hotel. So they rent out rooms as a hotel in those areas.
But they've been paying hotel motel tax.
It is not that much.
Yeah, but they've been
they are
paying.
paying it,
Mm-hmm.
But not for 82 rooms.
Not for 82
Right.
rooms.
based on 2 floors.
Mhm.
At one point, it was 1 floor.
Right, yeah.
Is there another building that is considered a rooming house in the city of Hagerstown? What
Yes.
is it?
We have the Women's Club that is a rooming house at 31 South Prospect Street, and also 645 Oak Hill Avenue is part rooming house, part apartments. There are rooming house rooms in that building. Those are only ones in Hagerstown.
Apples and oranges.
Right, I think,
Absolute apples and oranges, though, between
yeah,
the
I
women's
think that was
club.
that's what I was
Yeah.
saying, you know.
We have to be able to classify it different than that. I mean, the women's house and Dagmar,
Well, and the women's club, they stay for quite some time, like several years, I believe, or 10, I don't know.
Yeah. We do the inspection just once every 4 years in those buildings.
So, I mean, for me, you know, this doesn't go far enough for some, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And feels like it goes too far for others, and I don't know how you split the difference on that. I think the best I can say is because of the prevalence of the ones it doesn't go far enough for, that this is a good start, but isn't where I would end up. If I could find a way for the city to implement things that would bolster our position as it applies to points number 3 and 4, which is the extended stay, which are not designated for such occupancy, creating unsafe conditions. And number 4, the use of hotels as dwelling units or rooming house units in zoning districts which do not allow such uses. Both of those make the living conditions in specific instances where there is negligence unsafe. And for me, like, it doesn't just stop with unsafe as it applies to the occupants, but there's a reason that various public service entities are here. It makes it just as unsafe for those folks going into those places. And I guess that's why I say I just don't think this goes far enough. So, I mean, I'm good with everything that you're recommending. Although I had a question, and maybe this is, speaks to that, under the suspension and revocation considerations, under the second paragraph, I feel like it kind of says the same thing we say to our rental licensing program, which is, you know, we want to regulate these properties in a manner that ensures safe conditions for both the occupant and the entrant, but there's no, I would say there's no real teeth. I would say that there's an exorbitant process to go through to correct the things we simply know exist when we get there and see them. And, you know, I'm hoping that this piece is enough to accomplish that, to change that course. Because, you know, when you read that, but the transient housing structure would remain open, it's a bit defeating. You know, when you go, okay, you know, we're gonna nip this in the bud, but then you say, and I get it, you know. And then the second is the short-term transient housing. I know you sort of explained that, but I'm a little confused when it says, short-term rentals are currently permitted in any residential structure, and we recommend codifying that immediate neighbors, HOAs, or condo boards are to be notified of the owner's intentions to establish a short-term rental. So if you could just explain that to me just a little more, because I feel like that's a bit separate from what we're trying to do, which is address the obvious issues we have in larger, negligently operated hotels and motels.
One of the things I saw a lot of Maryland municipalities is that requirement that you notify the neighbors, and one of the things that we receive is we get calls from residents that saying that, hey, next door they put a short-term rental in, and they're renting out rooms, and they're causing loud noises, they're being disruptive, there's drug paraphernalia, whatever scenarios are. We didn't know that went into that place. We would have liked to know. So is that allowed? And we're like, well, they are allowed to go into those residential homes. So it's kind of making those neighbors aware. It's not saying that they can't go in.
Unless you have covenants.
Right, unless there's some sort of covenant, but they.
Portland Manor adopted covenants to say no short-term rentals.
And it's not saying the neighbors would stop them going in, it's just making the neighbor aware that it would be going in at the location.
I just don't want us to put ourselves in a position where we're chasing our tail on those instances that are fewer than the obvious issue of the larger entities operating in a manner that's not safe or appropriate or conducive to, you know, what we expect.
Yeah, I see where you're coming. We get a lot of calls on those.
Okay, but that's fair enough.
Are you guys good with this?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
We are moving United Way to October, so we have a preliminary agenda review.
Oh my gosh, look at us go.
We'll meet at 7 o'clock on the 27th. We'll have an invocation by Councilmember Martinez, pledge to the flag. We'll meet October 4th and 18th at 4 o'clock. No meeting on the 11th because of the MML Fall Conference. We'll have a regular session on the 25th. We have appointments to the Hagerstown Youth Council Partner Group members, citizen comments. We'll approve the minutes. On the consent agenda and administration, we have a change order for legal review of the cable franchise agreement for $20,000, open container exemption for the Halloween block party. For engineering, replace the flat roof over the POW for $394,000. Installation of rapid response flashing beacon at Salem Avenue and Rhode Island Avenue for $62,373. Guardrail repairs for $26,900, and tree planting program for $94,619. Under IT, we have ESRI GIS annual software renewal for $38,500. Building blocks annual software renewal for $13,000. For the PD, we have ammunition for $22,402.89, and the Faro Freestyle 2 handheld scanners for $20,443.73. For Public Works, a 2023 F-150 4x4 regular cab for $41,400, and a 2023 Ford Escape 4-door for $30,000. For utilities, light and emergency purchase for inventory items, $36,900. LED street lights for the Maryland Soul Grant for $223,360.50. RC Mowers remote operated slope mower for $57,950. 24-inch transmission main repair for $10,102.07. Water wastewater rate model update for $27,310. Wastewater pump station 13 reconstruction engineering services for $395,555. Pump station 33 engineer services for $366,285. Bar screen replacement parts for $28,898.86. engineering services for $406,460, and replacement of truck 528 for $564,495.85. Under unfinished business, approval of an ordinance authorizing the sale of property located at 11850 Indian Lane. For new business, introduction of an ordinance, deed of easement and agreement with Achar Properties LLC for 231 North Locust Street, Owens House. Introduction of an ordinance, conveyance of property no longer needed for a public purpose to Hagerstown Industrial Properties at 55 West Oak Ridge Drive. Approval of a resolution, waterline easement with Hopewell Road LLC and CE Hopewell Manor Associates to relocate a water line on the south side of Hopewell Road. Approval of a resolution, snow services contract with Heartland Earthworks LLC. Approval of a resolution reverting unimproved property to Central Chemical Corporation. Approval of a resolution, stormwater incentive program, Surrey School redevelopment. Approval of a resolution, revised sales agreement for 441 South Potomac Street. Approval of extension to city water and wastewater. Approval for Taylor Bowen Breeze Hill. Approval of refused collection agreement within the Summerlin Manor development. Approval of Light Division inventory procurement funds. Approval of after-school program Parkside Community Center. Approval of government relations engagement agreement with Compass GR Partners. Approval of Appalachian Regional Commission fiscal year 23 project funding, and approval of funding for FSU Hub at USMH. City Administrator comments, Mayor Council comments, and we'll adjourn. Any questions? All right. Next, we have the City Park Train Hub and 202 Locomotive. We have Rodney and Eric. And Amy.
Good afternoon. In light of the proposal that you received from Frostburg, Amy and I are here just to give you some information about the current status of the train hub in City Park. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the funding we have to restore the locomotive. Amy's going to talk a little bit about the programming, and then if you have any questions for us. So,
And just to make sure we're clear, the proposal didn't come from the city of Frostburg, came from Western Maryland Scenic Railroad.
right, thank you.
The mayor of Frostburg is just part of that.
Okay, thank you. So I put some of the history in the memo, how we received the train back in the 1950s. We are working on a project I'm going to talk about in a second for the restoration of the locomotive. We've been working with Strasburg Railroad out of Strasburg, Pennsylvania. They set a value, a preliminary value on the locomotive somewhere between $750 and $1.25 million. That's not a professional valuation. If there is consideration of knowing what the value of that locomotive is, that would have to be done in a more professional way. But that just gives you an idea of what we're talking about here. As far as the plan improvements go, John Long, several of us probably remember John Long. He was here for many years, and he took care of the train very lovingly and passionately. Since he's no longer around, since 2006, the train's basically been sitting in its current state. None of the staff can maintain it. We don't have a contractor maintaining it. So it is slowly deteriorating in its appearance. So to address this in 2020, we obtained a $396,000 federal grant to restore the locomotive's appearance, the aesthetics of it, and also to put a new pavilion over it to protect it. The cost estimate now for restoring that locomotive is around $300,000, and that again is just cosmetic. That's not to put it under steam. To put it under steam is millions of dollars, is what I'm told. But $300,000 would get it looking good again, and then the shelter is about $500,000. So we only have a $396,000 grant, so we're $400,000 short. That would either have to come from the city, and we have that in our FY23 budget, or we could ask for more federal TAP grant funds to meet that deficit. It's like everything else. It's more expensive than when we set out to do it 2 or 3 years ago. Also, we just recently invested in that area. We put in a new pavilion a few years ago. The park staff built, put in a new play set. We just awarded a contract for $460,000 to build new bathrooms there. That construction's about ready to start. Those are all things that have been recently done there to improve the visitor's experience. So you want to turn it over.
Sure. So as far as recreation, obviously the City Park Train Hub is a highlight, something that we promote as a must-see destination in City Park. I brought our brochure in case you haven't, if you're gonna take one and pass it around, seen that lately, but the 202 is the crown jewel of the site. But we really package the museum as a family-friendly destination. Kids and families can learn about the Western Maryland railroading history. As Rodney said, we have a new play set on site, a new pavilion that you can rent for parties. We do have an educational video learning about the history of Western Maryland railroading and the 202. And we try to have special events there at least once a month as far as programming. So it is a highlight of our recreation programming and events. And yeah, we do promote the 202. Actually, it's in the title of the City Park Train Hub, Museum and Steam Engine 202.
So I think if you flash forward a couple of years, if we continue with the plan that we have, it'll have a much better appearance. It'll be under a brand-new canopy. I've given you details in the packet about those two projects, and new restrooms would be there. And, you know, it would be definitely a more family-friendly facility, an ADA-compliant facility than what we have now. So that's where we've been heading. We just hope that this would aid you in your deliberation as you talk about what to do with Western Maryland Railroad.
Do you guys ever have field trips there?
We do.
Like the
We have a
schools and
lot of
stuff?
school groups and
Yeah.
field trips visit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Birthday party.
I mean, I guess, do you guys have any interest in entertaining, selling this? Or donating it, or whatever?
Yeah,
You are entertaining it? Is anyone else?
So,
I don't know.
I was trying to figure out what swapping yarns meant. Now I know. It's in the article. It says the engineers got together and swapped yarns. It means tell each other, tell stories. I didn't realize that. I wouldn't know that as readily.
Shots fired.
You
got me too.
I feel better.
So,
Definitely
thankfully, I have Google. I was just surprised at the cost of because we keep calling it a pavilion. So when I see 500,000, that's like a shocking number
It is,
for a pavilion.
yeah. No, it's very, it's.
Yeah, when you look at the
designed beautifully. It
design,
looks
so
like
I
a
want
one-time
the
train
public out there
station.
to hear 500,000 for a pavilion and go, well, you know, a pole barn's like 50 grand. But it's a way different thing than a pole building. I mean, it looks like an old
It
station.
does. It's gonna have light shining on it at night. There's gonna be windows that give it light in the daytime. It's gonna be much nicer display
Yeah.
than what we have now.
Oh, wow, nice.
And the cost of things right now are what they are.
Yeah.
It'd be like yarns.
Swap yarns. Get together and swap some
No, I
yarns,
know.
y'all.
You want to bring back puffs for kids, though? Puffs for kids. Hey, we're open to anything.
What kind of puffs?
No, okay.
What kind of puffs?
It's
Yes.
conceivable that it could be put under steam again. It would be a, seven-figure price tag. It could never travel down tracks. We don't have any tracks for it to travel on. But it is a static display, and I think it will always be a static display.
So we're keeping it,
I say keep it.
Yeah, I've
Keeping
been there a
it-
few times, and it's a great, the 202 is a great speaking point, and the kids love it. I'm for keeping it.
Yeah, my birthday party.
sorry, Frostburg.
Love you.
Okay,
Great.
good. Good.
Thank you.
Good.
We're either extra
Thanks.
giggly and loud or very quiet.
All right, Fairgrounds Park Powell
We are
Roof.
like,
Michelle's gonna drive the train on this one.
Yeah, I'll be here all night.
Michelle drives most of the trains in this building.
All right, so we're here this evening.
That joke right now.
At the time of budget preparation, we did not anticipate having a roof situation over at the Fairgrounds Park. That the portion of this roof, if I understand it correctly, and when the way it's leaking, it's coming down, and it's actually impacting the POW portion of our facility. So, of course, Eric Dykey and Ronnie Tissue got together and they did a bid to see how much this would cost us, and it came in at $394,000.
Fortunately for us, right now, we do have the ability, and it is eligible to be covered under ARPA. I did include a chart earlier. I don't know if everybody had an opportunity to look. But originally, we had, maybe close to a year ago, we had asked at the time that we did a roof replacement at 60 West Washington, that it came in a little bit higher. We thought we were going to need $100,000, and we were going to use $100,000 of ARPA. We were able to cover it with other funding. So what I would like to do is allow them to move forward with this roof replacement, reallocate that $100,000 that we already had for our roof, a city-owned facility, to here, and then do the additional $294,000 as well.
I'm okay.
Right now, I think we're gonna put it under revenue replacement, but considering the where it's impacting and the way that it's leaking, we wanna do just a little bit more research, to see if the POW portion would be considered a public building open to the public, but more than likely under the revenue replacement side.
You good with that?
Yep. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for your chart.
I really want to make the grandstands something. Grandstands, do something with them. All right, addressing community blight.
I do.
All right, back up again.
Hi.
Hello. All right, so one of the things, and it's not myself, also Scott has also been part of this, as we've been working on it for the last several years on how can we address community blight, and it kind of goes into several levels. It's not just through one program, but it's through multiple programs that the city has. A couple recap on it, that we passed some vacant structure ordinances in 2006, and we updated them in 2014 and 16. That we're working on trying to license vacant properties in our community and holding them accountable. The best thing we had was in 2020, we were able to hire a full-time employee for this to address these issues. And then in 2021, we had a change in administrative staff on some shifting around, but we actually got someone from customer service or support services, and that's really been helping us identify properties because they can look in utilities and read them so much better than any staff person can in the code office. Then also we adopted in 2016, we adopted the nuisance and abandoned property ordinance, where we could actually demolish vacant buildings if the circuit court deemed them as abandoned, or vacant, or nuisance or abandoned. And that process we would have to go through goes through the court system. If the city, or I'm sorry, if the court determines that we can demolish the property or make repairs to it, then we were authorized to go in and do that. We had to establish a funding program for that, so we did in FY 2018. And then lastly, in 2020, we adopted the tax sale repurpose program to try to repurpose and revitalize abandoned vacant properties. It's in its pilot phase right now. So how can we kind of strengthen our fight on blight here when we have these couple ordinances already in existence? Just one thing, like I had mentioned, with the vacant structure program, in 2019, we had 356 vacant properties in Hagerstown. As of August, we had 255. So that we have reduced it by over 100, and I would like to say that's because we have staff actually dedicated towards this program. They're able to get these properties moved. We're usually talking almost every day on this. So what can we do to kind of strengthen this program that we're starting to see some success from? One of the things is establishing an escalated fee for non-blighted residential properties based on their vacancy time period. Right now, if you're vacant either for 6 months is when you're required to be in a program, or you're vacant for 60 years, it is, if you're non-blighted, it's a $100 fee. So as we've seen these properties, just by having a staff person on for a couple years now, you're starting to see deterioration is starting to occur to the properties over years. Even though we're doing inspections, we're holding them to standards, they don't always do everything to keep them to a good standard, that they're starting to deteriorate and that they're allowing things to happen to the property. So establishing an escalated fee for these non-blighted residential properties. We already do that for the commercial properties, it's just doing the same thing for residential. Also the blight classifications that they're established for a year, putting that in the code, but also saying that if a property owner corrected all of the violations they were cited for, that in the first 30 days, that we would reevaluate the blight status and knock them back down to that lower fee structure. A lot of times people give us a call of like, hey, I'm blighted, what can I do to get this into that lower fee schedule? Well, you have to maintain the property. It's already been determined that. So it's kind of saying that if we determine a blight status of a property, that they could fix things up and get it to the lower fee structure, giving them an opportunity to make those repairs rather than just having it sit like that for a year in a blight status and the higher fee. Then also, one of the things is that establishing a non-residential license category for our vacant commercial use spaces on the first floor of a structure. So we have a lot of, in our downtown area, we have a lot of our first floor commercial spaces that are just not being utilized. They're not either being renovated or not being occupied. We can have caveats in it that if they created to a shell space where people could move right in for a tenant, then it makes it more of an opportunity for businesses that are looking to move into this area can actually have a business established versus looking at tens of thousands of dollars that need to be invested to make it habitable for the business. So it's making it where they have an opportunity to make shell condition spaces, the owners do, and then an opportunity for them to be leased. When we're looking at Chapter 224, which is the tax sale process one, even though it's in its pilot phase, we're already seeing some challenges with that program. There are different caveats in that state law that makes it more challenging for a government entity to acquire a property. And also with our ordinance itself that we have where, just imagine as yourself, so we have a nonprofit organization that has a board that we're asking them to go into a contract with the city of Hagerstown for a sight unseen property to go in contract contingent upon the city acquiring the property through the court system to purchase it and then transfer it right to that nonprofit organization. They have no clue what their investment would be because they can't go inside the property because we're not the owners. The owners have basically abandoned the property, so no one can actually see what the conditions are. We can show them pictures, but that doesn't help their board and doesn't help them on their budgeting purposes for these properties. So what we're proposing here is that the city acquires approximately 6 to 10 no-bid tax sales properties annually or over a couple years or so, utilizing different funding sources. There's ARPA, Community Legacy, HUD, and the property abatement funds, but we're doing it without interest from potential buyers. Now, there are restrictions to those funding sources that we might not be able to use certain ones for some properties depending on what the repurposed use of that property is. So there's a lot of caveats with the different funding sources, but we could utilize some of those funds to acquire the properties. Once the city has owned the property, then we could identify the proper course of action for some of these properties. You all have heard as the elected body, if this property is sitting next to me, it's deteriorated, it's dilapidated, what can we do? And they want it demolished, and so do we, but going through the processes sometimes are challenging. So then once we would acquire, we could determine to demolish the property or do any type of minor renovations to the property to then turn it over through a competitive negotiated sale process to another potential owner. Also, one of the things to try to speed up the process for the blight is working through a request for bid process to create a demolition contract for establishing 2 demolition contractors in Hagerstown that we could use whoever's available at the time, not only to eliminate blight, but this also would help with any serious situations that we have going on that would require demolition to be occurring at a property. One of the other things that we're talking about here is establishing, to try to eliminate some blight, is establishing a what we call a Hagerstown Urban Blight or Hub Grant Program, where if a property owner that has a vacant property wants to try to remove it there, but just doesn't have all the funding sources available to them, that's taking the property abatement fund that we have established as the city to utilize some of those funds to demolish a property. That's what the fund was established for the city to demolish properties, but now it's making a grant opportunity for a private individual to come forward to potentially get some funding assistance to demolish a property. So it's just establishing a grant program which would be reviewed by the Invest Hagerstown committee that we have. So what some of our next steps are is looking at to amend the vacant structure program to the ideas that were proposed as far as trying to protect our accessible base with those programs. Also authorizing staff to work with legal counsel to acquire these chronic nuisance tax sale properties, establishing the grant program, and then going through the demolition contract purpose for the request for bids proposals. So those are the real quick summary of everything there. Do you have any questions from me or Scott? Or Scott, do you have any other things to add on that?
Yeah, I can tell you that the state regulations have really made it extremely difficult in trying to get a program put together to take some sort of action on these properties. We are working with the city of Cumberland, who is also experiencing the same problems. And last year, Senator Edwards, at the end of session, right at the very end of bill introduction phase, put in 9 Senate bills that would kind of go the gamut, especially of the tax sale properties where the wholesale houses are coming up and basically warehousing their purchases, holding them for 2 years, keeping them tied up. We can't do anything with them. These 8 bills that we have already presented to the Community Coalition for their consideration. We'll also be talking to our lobbyists for them to look at, as is Cumberland with theirs, would basically take care of all of those impediments with the no 6-month wait for the foreclosure if the city wanted to take it over, the ability to intercede. If there was a warehouse that came in and bought over a certain percentage of the tax sale properties, because there is no way, if a particular company comes in and at times will buy up to 100, 200 properties, there's no way they're going to foreclose on those in 2 years. So we have to be able to have the ability to come in and identify those properties that could be dealt with in a timely manner and grab them, especially with some of the other initiatives that we're looking, I know the mayor is looking into through Housing First and some other opportunities that we could get these houses or these parcels unfrozen from just a zombie status, and get them productive, not only for the city, but also for folks that are in need of housing. So we'll be working, in fact, we have a meeting on Friday with the mayor and city administrator of Cumberland to talk about how, if there's anything else we could do along this, and also on the drug-free ordinance on properties as well, such as the one that I believe former Councilman Heffernan was talking about, and that Martinsburg uses at a pretty successful rate. So we're not letting this. We're not going to let this die on the vine. We have got to. We've got to make it easier to take care of especially these vacant, abandoned parcels that nothing good is happening in. The owners are 90% nowhere near Washington County, and we have got to start taking some proactive action on some of these properties, and this is at least a start.
So, under chapter 224, bullet point 1, just 2 clarifications for me. One is, I know we had a conversation with the county, I apologize if I missed this in your presentation somewhere, but what it's saying is we identify the 6 to 10 no bid tax sale properties annual by paying the outstanding taxes using various funding sources. So when we met with the county some time ago, they still want their money. Is that what I'm understanding?
They were willing to waive the outstanding tax, because that's really the only arrears they have is their tax, which is minimal. The only thing that we could not get out of was state income tax that we had to pay. But the county was, at least the county treasurer was willing to have that waived, the outstanding taxes.
I mean, it's really up to the commissioners who, won't get their money.
He felt he had commissioner support as well.
That's what I'm curious. And then the last part of that first bullet point, I just want to make sure that the word buyers is correct there. So you were talking about buyers as in other entities coming and buying, not sellers as in the owners of the property. When I read the sentence, it says abatement funds without interest from potential buyers.
Correct, because that was where we had to have, through the way chapter 224 is written, is that we have to have interest from a nonprofit organization to purchase the property before we can even go into to purchase the property or no bid tax sale, go to court.
I understand that word better now.
Nor would we allow the owner of record to come back in and attempt to buy their property back.
All right, I guess for me, I kept thinking, that our interest, at least to some degree, should be, we know the 255, like actually doing this outside of the tax sale process, almost cold calling and saying, hey,
Pretty much.
you're number one on the list, would you like to go ahead and get this squared away? That way it never gets to the tax sale process for
Right.
these entities to wholesale lock them up.
I just think we have to move. I mean, I know there's a lot of restrictions, but we've been talking about this for, it feels like years now. I mean, at
And
this
we-
point, we just need to buy some properties and figure it out.
And we tried every way we could to
That's what
not
I mean, not
own.
wait till tax sale, just
Yeah.
go buy 6 of them
Yeah.
where folks are ready to go.
We heard the council say, we did not want to get into the real estate. Yeah, we didn't want to get back in the real estate business. We have to get back into real estate.
I mean, the
I'm
first,
fine with that.
Yeah.
I mean, the first time we
This is
proposed this,
necessary.
I mean, I remember the guy coming in and saying, I don't like this, you're hitting a property that my mom left to me, and I'm like, well, when's the last time it was occupied? And he said 1985. I'm
Right.
like, well, you let it sit empty for 30 years, why don't you just transfer it to us at this point? You live in PA and you got a property you don't want or have any interest in, we'll take it off your hands. So, he doesn't want to be a landlord, and I get that, but.
Are you guys good with
Yeah, yes.
this?
Thanks,
forward.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, request for an extension to city water and wastewater approval for Taylor Bowen Breeze Hill. Doug and Nancy.
Good evening. Here to review a request of an extension to approval for an exception to the city's water and wastewater policy as a vital economic development project or in an economic development project located in a targeted economic development area at the airport, as delineated by the county's 2002 Comprehensive Plan for Exception Number 6. The approval was granted on April 27, 2021, of which the regular session packet is included in your packet today. And it's set to expire October 27, 2022. Since the approval, the developer has acquired the property and is now requesting a 14-month extension to engage an end user or developer for design of final approval. This request of extension would expire December 27th, 2023, if granted. So again, the background on the project is the developer's Taylor Bowen. It's a speculative industrial warehouse on 16 acres located at 14735 City Corp Drive in Hagerstown, Maryland. The investment is expected at $8 to $10 million, 25 to 40 jobs. We anticipate the water usage to be 400 gallons. This is, again, expecting it to be a logistics warehouse and not a light manufacturing, so it is a speculative development, so keep that in mind. So included in your pack as well is the request from Taylor Bowen for the approval.
So, I mean, I get you're obligated to bring this to us, and I have no problem with the request of a property that wants 400 gallons of water. I mean, that's nothing, but I will go back to my point I made on the last one. I think this is even more representative of that contradiction. You have a prospective property buyer that came to the body and said, hey, I've got a project of vital economic importance to this community, right? And I want a waiver under number 6 because this is a vital economic development project. But in the proposal, and I hear you say that it's going to be a single building, warehouse, but in here it also says that they may subdivide it and they may sell it off in parcels. In other words, that there's nothing in this that says, hey, I own the property, I have, a ready a purchaser that's going to do project X, that's going to produce results Y. So I don't have any more concrete awareness at this point that we won't be back here 12 months from now with another extension. And exception number 6 was not created as a slush fund request for the city's utilities. It was specifically created because after the argument with the county, we recognize that there are going to be those areas that happen to occur outside of the city that are of vital economic importance that need to sort of move through the difference of position we have on the matter. and get those projects accomplished because they are of immediate economic importance to the community, both for quantity of jobs and investment. And in this, there's nothing. I mean, it's just, hey, you know, 18 months ago, I was looking at buying the property and wanted to make sure I could, you know, if I bought it, I was gonna be able to have water for it, for some possible use. And now it's, hey, I bought the property and I may have some possible use for it at some point in the future for some purpose of economic interest. And again, the 400 gallons a day doesn't matter to me. I could say yes to that right now. That's not an issue. But that is not the way exception number 6 was written. That's not the purpose or intent or spirit of that whatsoever. I don't know how many of these come in, and I don't know how much more quicker we can get to that point where, okay, it's outside and it's in these areas and there's X amount, you know, to use county, and that's what you get. But this, I mean, anybody then can come in and make this argument, especially on the job number. I mean, you could make that argument for, you know, a convenience station. You know,
We are, this is in one of the county's targeted economic development areas. And so we haven't brought any forward if they haven't been in the targeted economic development area, or if they haven't been identified as one of these green polygons on the map. And I understand exactly, you know, what you're saying. I get it completely.
like vital to me means like critical, like emergency,
But I mean,
like immediate.
you can't just look at vital. You gotta look at it's in the targeted economic development area too. So, I mean, it is within the region that we've agreed to as a targeted economic development area. I mean, I get it. I mean, I understand your point completely, but I'm with you. I would much sooner rather than later get to that point
For me to say
where we
all
can
of that
say, here it
gets, all
is,
of that gets water.
this is it, and that's all you get.
You decide how to divvy it up out there.
Yeah.
But this is to me, it decreases the validity
Of number, I get it. I get
of
it.
number 6.
I
To the
get it.
point where you just come in and
But until we amend it, that's what it is. What it
every
is.
property owner that owns property in that entire area at this point should just come in and get exception under it based on the premise for what we're about to approve an extension here.
Yeah. I agree. Did you hear that, everybody? Good morning. Yeah.
So are you guys go with this?
Yep.
I'm not.
You're not?
No.
Okay. Are you guys go with granting the extension?
Well, this number 6 thing has always been a thing.
Yeah.
I mean, we already
And
approved it.
until you
That's
amend it,
the
it's
thing.
always
We
gonna
already
be a
approved
thing.
it.
Thing. It's been a
Well, and I
thing.
guess at that point, like, we're 18 months in now to something that there isn't anything that's changed.
We can't put up development because we.
Nancy
they can
tells
amend
me
it.
it's coming, change is coming. In the end.
I pray.
All right.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Last but not least, commercial sign and facade grant program recommendation.
I know, Chris is last again.
I told Dawn I'm gonna buy her some
I
candy.
only got one question.
Chris has no life, he can come late and stay last.
How does the Main Street come in? How does the Main Street?
We have not spoken to, well, before we get into everything else, we have not spoken to the Main Street Committee regarding this yet, because the sign facade grant application itself is under Invest Hagerstown, is under the Invest Hagerstown Review Committee. Main Street Committee does not oversee the program whatsoever.
I get that, but having HDC control the area, even though it's in the Main Street area, but it's not in the historic district.
Could
I
you
mean, I think
perhaps
Main Street
explain
Committee
for
ought to
the
have some
fine
input.
citizens watching what we're talking about?
Yeah, I'd like that to happen also.
Sure. So to start from the very top, we're here to seek mayor and council's guidance on a recommendation to essentially provide, have the HDC, the Historical District Commission, provide design review for all commercial sign and facade grant applications for Invest Hagerstown. Now, currently, Invest Hagerstown
facade grant is only for those businesses, those buildings that are within the Main Street district of Hagerstown's downtown area. The Historic District Commission, sorry, the HDC's downtown historic district, it does cover about 80% of Main Street, but there are areas outside of that as well. So this recommendation would to go ahead and essentially allow HDC's review and their recommendations to oversee those before it even comes to Invest Hagerstown's Review Committee for approval for any kind of grants that are coming through for that. It's believed that the recommendation would create efficiency and consistency in the administration of the grant program, utilize the experience of HDC to provide broader insights that staff review may not be able to provide, and protect the city's interest on aesthetical impacts within both Main Street District and Downtown Historic District.
So if I could just use an example, because I think the example would better allow me to better understand what's being asked for here. When you go down South Potomac Street, and there was a laundromat there for a period of time, right, that was closed near the library, and then just past that is now, it was various number of stores, and now it's
Penny Mart.
Yeah, it's Penny Mart.
Correct.
I just get the impression that sort of what's being asked for, and I want to make sure that's not the case, they're flashy, right? They're alive. They're lit up and you know.
Vibrant.
Yeah, they just, you know, they may not fit exactly with the historic nature of those buildings. Is that in or outside of the area?
So that would
Okay.
be, yes.
Was that something that was reviewed by HDC?
The signs were.
The signs were, not the temporary signs.
Yeah, not the temporary signs, and probably not if they've got any kind of wild lighting that would have been put up without their review.
I guess my concern is I've driven past that area for as long as I can remember, probably as long as I've been able to drive, right? And that laundromat sat there vacant and smelly
And dark.
dark forever, right? And now I drive past there and I'm like, you know what? Those are two awesome lit up businesses that are providing vital services. And I would never want to give additional fodder to the HDC to say, that's something that we can't have there. I just have that concern because that's absolutely the type of presence, lit up presence that I would want to see and businesses that I think are critical and important to bringing life back down to downtown and the entire Main Street area.
We're just trying to, not so much from a historic standpoint, trying to bring a little bit of logic into the aesthetic review. The committee does not feel at all comfortable. I'm the lone voice saying, wait a minute, they can do a little better with this, but because there's no design standards for the committee, it's a very difficult step. We had one case, and I won't identify the property, but they put up the signs before they got their grant approved. And the signs did not fit where they put them. And I said, you know, we could do a little better than that, particularly since they're getting city money to do this. And so they redid it, so the signs actually fit into the place on the building where they're supposed to go, rather than hanging over onto the glass from the top of the building. So that's the kind of stuff we're talking about. But the committee doesn't feel comfortable being the aesthetic police.
Yeah, I'm
And
not
when people,
comfortable
people
giving
see
that
something
authority.
they think is, this is just the most hideous thing I've ever seen, and then they say, oh, and the city gave them a facade grant. People are gonna be like, what are we doing? That's what I think.
Yeah, but my kids say that about the mural of unusual size, you know what I mean? And I like it. So I don't know that I'm ready to give them the authority to be the aesthetic police when it comes to that stuff. If it creates a hindrance, city money or not, to that type of I don't know what the, brightness. I don't think that's the right word, you know.
Life.
You know,
Well,
coming back. That's
the grants that were received at the Penny Mart were approved by the HDC. There was no grant at Hub City Bubbles for reasons we won't go into, but they did approve the signs without a grant. So those examples you're providing were approved by the HDC. Penny Mart has now put more signs on that were not grant funded and did not go through any approval process. But the permanent signs they got a grant for were approved by the HDC.
I think I'm, back to your original question, Bob, too, is like, what is the Main Street and their vision for, what does Main Street, with the branding and the change and what we're looking at, what does that, having the HGC as the reviewer, does that change anything? Does that?
The Main Street program was originally created in the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and it combined economic development and historic preservation. There's always been a link there.
And going back to that, once again, the Main Street District itself, 80% of that is within the
Oh, I
downtown
get it,
historic
I get it,
district
there's
as
still
well.
20% that's not.
Exactly.
I can do math too.
Yeah, I'd
just-
want to. I'd
So,
want to hear about
just
it.
as an example of a business that would not be in the Main Street area, sorry, is in Main Street area, but is not in the downtown historic district, I believe is the new Hibachi Hero, Hero Hibachi and Sushi, that's over on Locust Street. I believe, unless it's that one little lip of how it is currently, I need to look at the map again. But I believe that would be one that's within Main Street, but not the District Commission, as well as a couple of buildings that are over on East Washington, as well, that are currently vacant.
Things on the east side of Kramer's Alley are outside the historic district. And Kramer's Alley is the alley right to the right of Potomac Street, if you're looking at the map that way, east to right.
Right, yes, no?
I'm not feeling it.
I'm a no.
I'm a no.
No, but, yeah, no.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
City Administrator.
Just a couple things, Mayor. We have Imagine Hagerstown this Friday, University Plaza. Jaw Works is the headliner. That is a family favorite, so I'm sure you'll see my crew down here. 5:30 to 8:30 on Friday night. And then also Saturday at the Fairgrounds is the annual Color Splash 5K Run Walk. Starts at 9 o'clock. It's a family event where participants run or walk through 5 color areas, clocked with no timing chips. They'd have to use an hourglass to time me if I did it. It's always a fun thing. It's a messy thing, but it's a fun thing. And that starts at 9 o'clock. You can sign up. I know you can sign up on the Convention and Visitors Bureau website, and there's a link on the Hagerstown website as well. That's it.
Councilmember McIntyre.
Nothing tonight.
Councilmember Burgee. Councilmember Burnett.
Yes, today is National Voter Registration Day. The November 8th election is in 48 days. So take some time out today to make sure you're registered to vote. And if you're already registered, also check to make sure that your address is current. And you can go to the Washington County Board of Elections to find out information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Rauscher.
I don't have anything.
Councilmember Martinez. All right, I just want to give a shout out to our Parks and Rec Department for this past weekend at Fall Fest and the Buster Community of Hope. There were fireworks at City Park. I mean, there were probably 1,500 people in the park when I was there. It was packed every single place. The music was awesome that Buster did. The vendors were awesome. And I know it was a very busy day in the city, so just shout out to them. And yeah, look forward to seeing everyone at Imagine Hagerstown this weekend. We're adjourned.
I will be in color.
You were sort of the star of the show, at least in terms of presenting to mayor and council this evening. So there's plenty to talk about there, because I think first when we start with the transient housing, for me, what's really amazing when I look at that, there are many things that we can cover here. You sort of set the stage. There were things that were discussed. So instead of regurgitating a lot of that, I wanted to delve into the statistics a little bit, because they really catch my attention based on the 12 hotels that we have in the city of Hagerstown. So I know what intrigues me. What is it that you found to be interesting? Maybe you can cite some of those stats.
Well, one of the first things was that we have 12 hotels in Hagerstown. While doing the research for this and comparing us to other communities, we have a lot more hotels in Hagerstown than other jurisdictions do, similar in size. And I think a lot of that has to do with our two interstates that interchange here in Hagerstown. So that was one of the first numbers that came out to me. Then next is the number of rooms that we have available for people in Hagerstown. We have over 1,200 rooms available for rent in Hagerstown through a hotel. So that was a high number. And then also the calls for service for our police and fire and CRS to go out to these places for calls for service. As far as in our code department, we don't get too many calls because the people stay there. If they're frustrated with it, they just don't go back. But if they are there for any type of situations that are going on in the hotel itself, they're going to be calling the police and the fire department to assist with those issues. And those calls for service were extremely high. I know you have the number in front of you. I forget offhand. I think it was over 1,700 calls.
1,707 for that 12-month period of the year 2021.
Yes.
So that seems like a lot to me. And then I delved into the math a little bit more. I don't pretend to be a mathematician, so this isn't something that was rocket science by any stretch, but an average of 142 calls per hotel. And as you laid it out in your presentation, you have the tier 1s and the tier 2s if we were going to go that route in terms of looking at them. So obviously the tier 2s have a lot more calls. Now, at the same time, 142 per hotel per year, 365 days per year, approximately 1 call per hotel every 2.5 days. That seems like a lot to me. And I think that's probably one of the things that we're attempting to address with all of this.
Right. And like you had mentioned, we have our tier 2 hotels that one hotel has over 7 calls per room per year. And that's
per room.
Yeah, per room per year.
Yeah.
So that's a very high number. That's every other month for a room that you're going to that same room over and over again. So that number alone is really high when you compare it. And like you said, 142 for the math, because you're challenging my math degree now, I think is what you're trying to do. That you have 142 rooms, but some of our hotels don't even get above the 50 range for a year. And sometimes that's, I can know that our people can call for, loud noise or people playing music late at night that's disrupting people. So that can then cause a call to go out to the place. But our ones that are having the extreme calls for service, where it's 7 or 3 or 2 calls for service per year per room, is extremely high.
Yeah, how difficult an endeavor is it creating some sort of uniform policy for something that seems so ununiform, to sort of make up my own word there? It's not very consistent across the board, because there are nuances with each hotel, each place where people stay. There are things that are different, obviously. So, how difficult is that when you bring a presentation before mayor and council, and then obviously you get their input? Where do you start with all of that?
Right, so a lot of it was starting with some research, just trying to see what other jurisdictions had done. And one of the things we have in our community, because we have so many hotels, we do have hotels in our community that are doing a very good job of maintaining a high standard and a high quality to stay at. But as we mentioned during the presentation, we have to treat all hotels fair and consistently. We can't target specific hotels as a governing agency, because that would subject us to other things that we don't want to be involved in. So we're treating them all fair and consistent, and just establishing some standard for different hotels.
So what do you say to people? Because I'm sure this argument's out there, and maybe you even heard it in having discussions with individuals about this, who say, well, doesn't this all take care of itself in some way because there are Yelp reviews and things like that? Doesn't that just all work itself out? How do you answer that?
Right, that's a good one. A lot of times people do say, "Oh, I read the reviews online," but there are people out there that you can pay to make reviews online. You can have higher rating for hotels online. Anyone can write a review and say, "Hey, this is the best day ever."
It's like stuffing the ballot box.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That you can have something to say it's a great hotel, and a lot of times people are looking for good deals, and some of our hotels that are getting a lot of calls for service might have a lower rate for a hotel stay. And when you're traveling and you're trying to just get through an area that you want to have a less expenses while you're moving, you might stay at one of these hotels that is not the best experience for you.
Yeah, how do you go about balancing? I think the top priority here is safety overall. I think that's probably where we are with that. But then, as you mentioned during your presentation, and something that all of us sort of gravitate towards is this idea of these places being undesirable in some way, and then finding your way into it as someone who's a visitor to the city, and that's the impression that you take away from being in the city of Hagerstown. So how much jurisdiction do you believe that the city should have, and perhaps even through your department, to oversee that and make it an experience for a visitor to the city to have a positive experience to look back on when they leave?
Right. So a lot of times it comes in establishing certain standards, as far as we talked about with training for people, so that they can make sure that there are incidents that won't occur, or they can at least properly identify those items to mitigate some of those things, so that a visitor wouldn't see this stuff. And then also, when you have standard uniformed inspections from not only just through what maybe a hotel chain would have, but just through the governing body itself, you establish some standard where it's always being maintained to that level. And by having annual inspections by the fire and code departments, you can make sure that when, no matter any hotel anyone stays at, they're going to meet some minimum standard that the city has established for our transient guests.
What did you take away from the feedback that you received from mayor and council during the meeting? They seem to be pretty much on board with this presentation. I think they've moved forward a little bit from when you first presented to them back in July. Obviously, this conversation's been going on a long time, even before that. But what was your takeaway from what you heard from them today?
Right. So, like you had mentioned, this is the fifth time we've talked about this in 5 years.
Oh, is that it?
Yes. So it is something that we keep on bringing up about this, and I think that this elected body has seen that, we are going to start having more transient guests in our community with all of the activities going on with the stadium, our sports complex, and our A&E district. That we got to be prepared to be able to accommodate these guests and also make them want to come back to Hagerstown. And I think that's the biggest thing that I've taken away from this, is that we want to try to protect our transient guests in this community to keep coming back.
Let's shift gears to the other item you had on the agenda, which is community blight, and what do we do about that? It's something that obviously is one of those things that stands out to people. You drive through the city of Hagerstown, you're going to see some dilapidated buildings, properties here and there. I don't fully understand, and maybe you have some insight into this, why, and it was part of the discussion earlier, about why some of these property owners just decide to hang on to these properties that are literally falling down and are an impediment to the city stepping in and getting rid of them for everyone's sake. I don't fully understand that, because aren't they still paying taxes on those properties? I mean, is there a benefit for them to own these properties that are in such bad shape?
I don't know about a benefit. In some of the properties we talked about, they're not paying the taxes. So the tax bills are growing every year on that property, and that they get to a certain point where the taxes owed on the property far exceed the value of the property anymore. So then there is no reason for any investor to come in to try to acquire the property. The owner is not really paying anything on it, and the city turns into the maintenance of the property, of keeping it secured, mowing the lawn, keeping the junk off the property. So then it just becomes more of a burden to the taxpayers than it is to the property owner.
Yeah, I can't imagine that that's really a strategy on anyone's part, though. You know what I'm saying? And then the other thing that I heard that and you deal with this all the time, a city administrator deals with this, anyone within the city who wants to do something to eliminate the blight that's here, that the state sort of stands in the way in a number of different ways. Why is that? I mean, what is their motivation with their policies? Why is it so difficult for a municipality to be able to do what, I mean, anyone who can look and see these properties knows that, I mean, that's just not worth anything at this point. Why is it that these policies are in place from the state? Because it seems like that is the entity that is really holding back progress on eliminating these blighted properties.
I guess first, probably the elected officials for the state don't want to see people's property being taken away from them without any type of due process would be my guess at first.
Right, and see, to me, that's very interesting, because here you have government saying, okay, we're the bigger governmental agency, we're going to make sure that you, as a smaller governmental agency, can't do this, but this is only going to benefit your community. Again, this is something that is obvious to everyone. You can see it. So it's not one of those things where I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is some sort of conspiracy by the government to take something away from me as a taxpayer, because as you said, many of these people aren't paying the taxes on these properties, and those are the ones we're talking about.
Right, and I think one of the things is that as Administrator mentioned, that looking at some bills to try to eliminate some of the hurdles for a municipality to acquire the properties, because the municipality has to go through the same steps as a private entity, and I think that might have been an oversight with the state at times of not realizing that the municipality might be able to see the best course for the property rather than treating them as a private investor.
Right, and really, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but really the only thing that the city can do is impose fees on these property owners for the most part, right? So how successful is the city in collecting these fees?
Yeah, so for some vacant properties, but do get collected, and it kind of depends on what their mortgage status might have been or things along those lines, because sometimes people might have left the property but are still paying the mortgage, and then there's taxes that are being paid on that level, and then at also times, then the liens get so high where we're doing the maintenance to the property, we're billing the owners, they're not paying the bills, so we lean it onto the property, and then it just increases the tax bill to it. And then you have where, as our administrator mentioned, you have wholesalers or other people that come in just to pay it. So basically, someone comes in and just pays all the taxes owed. It clears the bill for the city and makes the city whole for the property, but it doesn't resolve the blight problem, because then it just gets into a holding pattern for 2 years, and then it just goes back to the same situation.
Yeah, what a tremendous tug of war that is, because on one hand, all of a sudden those taxes are no longer in arrears. So it's good in a way for the city, but then it's negative on the other side because the properties remain in the state that they're in.
Right, because the person that purchased it, for those that are watching, that they purchase it because you can charge more interest when you do a tax purchase than you can by investing your money in the bank. So you can make more money that way. So they're doing it as a speculative way of hoping that they're going to get more return on their investment.
Right.
But then sometimes they're just paying the bill to a municipality, and they just take it as a loss that they just were willing to move forward on.
Right. They're taking a chance for sure, but at the same time, man, it is just not helping from the standpoint of, seeing what we've been seeing all this time when we're trying to make progress on the other side and just eliminate that. So based on your presentation to the mayor and council, what are the next steps from here? Because I know, again, like you said, I mean, this has been years in the works. What have you learned to this point which would lead to the next steps, I guess?
So tonight, you know, we have that one chapter that requires us to go through the no-bid tax sale process by always having a buyer basically in the wing, basically available for it. Tonight's takeaway was the city needs to start acquiring these properties so that we can move them. And that is the best course of action for the city so that we can actually find the best future use for that site, whether or not it's as a vacant lot for a redevelopment or if it's taking that property out of someone's hands and getting it into an investor that's willing to make the repairs needed to make it a viable property in the community.
If anyone has questions about blighted properties, or there's a blighted property that they want your department to know about, or, I mean, are there suggestions that you have for people in terms of contacting your department and just saying, hey, I have a concern with this property? I mean, how do you handle things like that? Where do you direct them exactly?
So generally, if anyone has a concern about a blighted property in Hagerstown, they can always email us at cocompliance@hagerstownmd.org, or they can call the city, and we're extension 103. One of our administrative people can take that message, and we'll route it to the right people to get that addressed as much as we can, because we do know that the blighted properties become attractors to unwanted activity. So the better the neighbor next door can give us better information than us driving down the street. They can know what goes on at night at the property. So certainly reach out and let us know so that we can start addressing those issues and make it better for them to be living in their home.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Thank you very much, Paul. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
And thanks to all of you for watching. And for now, that's a wrap. We'll see you next time on Council Wrap.